Thank you, Esther. When I mentioned earlier that Slavoj was talking about things, I meant it literally. Indeed, he was talking about materialism, about the different types of materialism that he has been writing about.
Don't add insult to injury, you know. Because my association was, you know, isn't there a famous quote in Shakespeare, Hamlet, like, you know, the king is a thing, but like, my motto would be, Costas is a thing, but a thing is not in Costas, but let's drop that. What I want to say is that I immensely enjoyed all three presentations before me, and if I were to have more time, I would certainly like just to reply them. For example, with you, Stephen, I really admired what you presented, but my first association is a very nasty one, but extremely friendly. You know, a dream about, you know, that famous Freud's example, you know, where he refers to a patient who says, whoever that mother in my dream was, that woman is not like, you proudly say, no, fuck you, that was my mother in my dream, you know. And this is the materialist answer, you know. But quite seriously, let me begin with David, whom I incredibly appreciate, because again, as everyone knows, to break out of the standard cultural critic Marxism, it's good for us critical human scientists to remember from time to time that nonetheless for Marx, Capital was not a work of cultural criticism, no, that it was a work of, and I especially appreciated what you said, you finished with that critical edge against this so-called ethical, or we can say ecologically conscious capitalism and so on. And if we talk about popular culture, I can only tell you how, this is what I'm often telling my friends who claim that you are this old-fashioned Marxist, look at today's culture, we are elsewhere. No, look at the most popular Hollywood and you find in it. For example, a nice illustration of what you were saying is the one before the last, James Bond, Quantum of Solace. You know what it's about, really? It's about a big international corporation who is precisely called something like green, bringing back to, really wants to overthrow Morales in Bolivia. And what I like is this anti-green capitalism edge in it. So let me go on. I like your concluding point about how to behave towards Marxist legacy and so on, where I think that first, we should totally drop this apparently historicist, relativist approach, best encompassed by this disgusting for me Benedetto Croce's motto, quoted on the very first page, I think, of Adorno's Drei Studien zu Hegel. No, Adorno brutally rejects this idea. You know, the title of Benedetto Croce, Italian liberal thinker, was, he wrote a book on what is alive and what is dead in Hegel. Like, you know, this like, we today, we see Hegel's limitation and we should distinguish what is of use, what is not of use. And Adorno says, he was a dialectician, true on that. The question we should ask today, raise, is exactly the opposite one. Not what of Hegel is still alive today, but how would our contemporary society look in the eyes of someone like Hegel? Not what Hegel, you know, this arrogant evolutionary position, does Hegel still have something to say to us? Where then you arrive at the usual stupid answer, you know that. Not in his speculation, but some of his historical analysis can be of some use. No, the question is the opposite one. And my point is that we should do exactly the same with Marx. Yes, we should be critical, maybe move forward from Marx, but precisely by beginning in this way, what would our contemporary, whatever we call it, postmodern, all terms are wrong, I claim, these terms. They are not real theory, they are journalistic catchwords. Capitalism, how would it look in the eyes of Marx? Because I claim, I even will try to enumerate some historical examples of the productivity of such approach. Look at this example I take from Alain Badiou. Look at the early modernity. Who provide the most pertinent insights into it? precisely Pascal. That's why he is still read today. Because Pascal has a deep sense, bless Pascal, of what is modernity, what the new scientific mathematical universe means. But then his problem was how to still remain an Orthodox Christian in these conditions. And
Catholic, not Orthodox.
This is a more... No, not Orthodox in your degenerate, Orthodox Russian, not in Putin way, if I may put it, because Putin rediscovered himself now as an Orthodox. No, seriously, what I want to say is that, and I would like to make link to you, to Eisenstein and so on, another triumphant example of this. If you look the first years of talking movies, those apparent reactionaries, from apparent in the sense of having critical misgivings about talking movies, from great Russians, Eisenstein and so on, to Chaplin, but they saw much more deeply what the revolution of sound is. They saw it immediately in Chaplin, this is clear. That's why, you know, it's wonderful to follow how dramatic it was for Charlie Chaplin to adopt sound. First, in City Lights, you get just music, and the only proper sounds are when an object hits some, you know, that. Then in modern times, it's a wonderful tension. You don't hear persons saying any words. All the words you hear are from media within the film, like when the tramp listens to the radio, you hear, but no direct voice. Then you have the first fully talking movie, The Great Dictator, where paradoxically it's absolutely clear the conflict between the two, that is to say the poor Jewish barber and Hitler Hinkel, is the conflict between image and sound, you know. The poor Jewish barber is more or less the continuation of the old tramp figure, while Hitler is a pure image of sound. You first see his shouting voice and then his body appears as a... So what I'm saying is that what they saw is this continuous gap that sound, it's not simply a property of a body. Sound is more like something parasitic which destabilizes a body. There is a dimension of spectral undeadness, whatever, in the sound. So in the same way, I claim, yes, we should move further from Marx, but precisely by remaining faithful to Marx, not by engaging in these arrogant games, what is already to be abandoned in Marx, and so on and so on. So, and since some of you mentioned also very deeply the notion of freedom, I would like just to make some brief remarks here. I think the crucial thing is to provide a concrete historical analysis of what does it mean to be free today, because, you know, the apologists of cognitive capitalism or postmodernism or risk society, whatever, always emphasize this point, that with this new dynamic risk society, whatever, we are given new freedoms. And that's how they reinterpret even our new limitations. This is, for me, ideology at its purest today. I remember, maybe he changed his position now, I don't know. In the heyday of Tony Blair rule, Anthony Giddens, when somebody asked him, but look at all these precarious workers, you have to, if you are lucky, you get a 2 years contract, you have blah, blah. His answer was, but don't you see, if you look at this not from your old paradigm, but from a situation, this gives you a new freedom to reinvent yourself every year, every 2 years, and so on. So, you know, all the points where we are deprived effectively of freedom are sold to us as a new form of freedom. Like, you don't have universal health care. Wonderful news, you are free to choose. Will you? You know, like, you know, this was done relatively good, although I agree with you, I don't totally follow them with Lazzarato and Frank Bifo, some of them, how the great ideological triumph of neoliberalism today is basically to address each of us as a small level capitalist. The idea is this one. You are a poor worker who barely survive and you get indebted. You're already a capitalist, because when you acquire a debt, you are in a position of a capitalist to think how you will invest this. You make a free decision. Will you invest it into healthcare? Will you invest it in your education? And so on and so on. So I think that this type of freedom is the freedom. This is, you know, what it means. What it means today to be free within the space of ruling ideology. This type of freedom, which is really a terrible burden of anxiety, pressure, and so on and so on. Against this notion of freedom, I like to return almost to this religious, even Protestant predestination form of freedom, because I tried to imagine what would it have meant today to experience your freedom at its purest. And it's my old joke, maybe some of you know it, but I don't think paradigmatic freedom is this simple free choice. You know, I go to around the corner here, Patisserie Valerie, will I have a strawberry cake or a chocolate eclair or whatever? No. Freedom is this one. That's so interesting in predestination. You are predestined, but of course you don't know what. What's your destiny? And basically you have to choose. What? And the anxiety is incredible. What if I miss it? And so on, you know. At that moment, you are much more free when you have to guess what is your destiny than in this simple freedom. And I think authentic freedom looks like this. It's not, oh, I've chosen chocolate cake, it doesn't really matter. No, it's literally, I discovered what I was destined for, as it were. This is for me, for example, an authentic political engagement. For let's say, for emancipatory struggle. It's not, I've decided to take a trip to Bahamas or to fight for emancipation or what. It's, I've decided that, to put it in pathetic terms, to retain my dignity and honor, I simply have to do this. I don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. That's actual freedom. And let me go further here. I also agree with David about this actuality of Marx in the sense that what if what Benjamin says about every historical text, that only the future will bring the developers whatever will allow us fully to read it. I think this holds, that's what I'm trying endlessly to present in my books, that this holds also for Capital of Marx. In almost all of my books, I, as it's well known, self-plagiarize myself and develop this point. For example, commodity fetishism. Althusser was totally wrong in his critique in early year Le Capital of reading commodity fetishism as this simple humanism, you know, instead of people among themselves things. No, there is an incredibly productive idea, fully valuable only today, I claim, of this idea that we can be cynical, disengaged, but we are fetishist through things. Because what Marx noticed is that, this is often forgotten, ordinary bourgeois subject is not a fetishist who thinks, oh, there is something magic in money or commodity. No, as Marx makes it clear, an ordinary bourgeois subject is usually a utilitarian nominalist, you know. But the Marxist point is that how he acts on the market, or even Marx uses prosopopeia, you know, like he says, you know, if commodities were to be able to talk among them. So here, I think, today's constellation not only doesn't make us abandon Marx, but even allows us to find something new which was in a way already in Marx himself. I don't think that it was possible to see the true dimension of Marx's theory of commodity fetishism before today's state of globalized cynical ideology. So just to make some slightly provocative, maybe concluding points. First one, I do agree. I also have the same doubts as you, if I got you correctly, about this, like, as it was fashionable to say in deconstructionist time, undecidable status of Fred Jameson's category of cognitive mapping. But what I claim is that precisely because of this, let's call it simply disorientation, it throws a new light upon some things. Maybe some of you know this story of mine, but I like to repeat it really. For example, I'm sorry if I repeat myself, I learned from friends who know some Bosnian linguists that there is now a whole set of jokes made by citizens, people from Srebrenica, the site of the great slaughter, about themselves. It's an incredible phenomenon. You have a series of jokes. Sorry if you know this one that I'll repeat it. You know, one joke is that a guy who escaped Srebrenica and went to work to Germany is now returning back to Bosnia and wants to buy some land in Srebrenica, no? And he asked a friend, so what are the prices of land there, no? And the guy answers him, of course, it's variation of this standard thing you do in a Yugoslav butcher. When you ask for half a pound of beef, they ask you usually with or without bones, like, would you like to make a soup of it, no, or not? And the answer is, well, it depends if you want land with bones or without bones and so on. I think this is not disrespectful. There is it's not that those people are crazy. There is an admission in this that, how should I put it, things are too terrifying to be taken literally seriously. When you have real brutal violence and suffering, it's totally fake to do some dignified, no, all this total bullshit like, oh, we are all Srebrenica, you are in our heart, whatever. No, the only way to cope with it is to admit your failure through a joke. That's also a reason I claim why, but that's another story, all good Auschwitz films are comedies. There is a deep truth in it. If you were to do an Auschwitz tragedy, like a Jew there heroically confronting a Nazi torturer with some stupidity like, you know, you can kill me, but you will never kill my spirit or whatever, it would be too much a favor to Nazis, because it would diminish the horror of Auschwitz. The whole horror of Auschwitz was that you were to such an extent deprived of your humanity that such a heroic gesture was not possible. So let me go quickly on, just to conclude. So, based on all this, the problem I try to address a little bit in my class is the following one. It's fashionable to say, everyone says this, you don't have to be a Marxist or even a leftist, that today we live in chaotic times in the sense that we no longer can rely on nature in the old sense, Aristotelian, you know, that things may be chaotic, but nature is characterized as big, reliable cycles, you know, like the sun gets up every day, whatever, seasons, fall, autumn. The idea is that nature is this big circular movement on which you can rely. Today, the effect of capitalism and of modern science is that this type of nature is disappearing. Everything, up to natural laws, is open to dynamic process. Okay, now the problem here is how to react to this constellation. And we have two, formally, abstractly, two answers. I disagree with both of them. One is, let's call it a defensive approach, which you even find by some leftists. The idea is this crazy social dynamics is making us crazy, totally deracinating us. So the idea is we have to find a way to somehow limit this excess. For example, in many ex-colonies, or so-called, I hate the term, third world countries, the idea is they should remain faithful to their ancient culture. This will enable them to block, to prevent the so-called destructive effects of global capitalism, you know. But I think this is doomed to failure. Especially, you can see the failure of this in this couple, biogenetics, bioethics. I think bioethics is just an effect to afterwards, in a second step, control the damage. It doesn't work. This limiting approach, like let's retain the proper measure. The opposite approach, which is what, if I got it correctly, David was criticizing, is this, let's call it, I don't hate them, they did some good things, but nonetheless, the Negri Heart and some others, it's usually called, I think, accelerationism, you know. No, we should even push further the crazy capitalist dynamics to the end. And Negri is quite consequent here. He says, no, the voices of the future today are not the remaining factory workers. The voices of the future today are, he says, he goes even so far as to say precisely those, the most speculative investors who play with futures and all that, that is the communist future. And he even says somewhere, we are almost there, that this cognitive, whatever post-capitalism is almost already communism, just a purely formal shift. I don't buy this. My first reaction to this is that we should stop this poetry about how dynamic, creative, or whatever the new capitalism is. Isn't it that, and here Marxism can be of use. Of course it is in its appearance chaotic, all you want, etc. But this chaotic process is not a blind process. It is regulated by very transfixed matrices and so on. And that's maybe where we should begin. Not simply accelerationism, but, you know, what's the very stable, monotonous mechanism that pushes forward this eternal exaggeration? And just a final point. Really final, yeah. But not in the sense of linear notion of time. But my final disagreement is this idea, Deleuzian, also fake Deleuze, more Negri and hard, this praising permanent engagement against representation, passivity, and so on and so on. You know, Adorno said somewhere, you can correct me, maybe I'm wrong, but I think he did say that the big problem today, he, I think, specifically referred to art, that the big problem today is not that we are passive consumers, but on the contrary, an authentic passive experience. You know, we are so predetermined, caught in hectic activity, that to open up yourself to an authentic passive experience, it's what is really difficult today. So generally, I wouldn't say disagree, but would shift here the topic from my best friend Alain Badiou, who likes to emphasize this engagement for the event and so on and so on. I'm almost ready to say that maybe what we need today is to disconnect, step back, adopt a passivity. We need to go through the 0 point of passivity and drop all this. We have to be even more engaged and so on and so on. So to really finish now, I'm sorry if some of you know it, but I love it. As my ethical model, I will read to you my own free prosaic translation of an ancient medieval Serb poem, which is my ethical ideal. Don't be afraid, it's 5-6 lines, the whole poem. It's about two great figures from Serb medieval mythology, Kraljević Marko, Prince Marko, the great hero of Serb medieval songs, and meeting his warrior companion and competitor, Ljutica Bogdan. It means basically angry Bogdan. So they meet, and I warn you, this is the whole song. Just listen. Prince Marko and Ljutica Bogdan, so they say, met on that day. The two grim heroes observe each other for a long time on a field, each on his horse. Which of the two will start the fight? They wait for one another. You know what, my Marko, said Ljutica Bogdan, it would be better for both of us if each of us goes his own way, into the vineyard, onto the field. If we were to fight, the world would tremble, and who knows who would keep his head on. Then, the last line of the poem, eagerly awaiting these words, Marko ran off of the horse across the field. I like this poem because, you know, the big confrontation, you think, and then they say, fuck it, why should we do it? Maybe we need this today, you know, more of this. Don't get caught in this nervous hyperactivity and so on. This is today precisely the language of this pseudo-dynamic capitalism and so on. The really difficult thing is just to step back. Like Lenin, you remember, the world fell apart. What did he do? Well, let's go to Switzerland and read Hegel's logic. Maybe this is more needed than ever today. Thanks very much.
Thank you all. You realized what a varied and diverse series of topics, themes, ideas, and and performance method we had.